Myke Cole, you have been an intelligence officer for what, 16 years, more about, according to the bio that I've been reading. A manhunter on TV, a counter-terrorist targeter, you will tell me what that is in a minute, a criminal investigator, and you have written 12 books. And today we will speak about your latest book, The Brown's Lie, Shattering the Myth of the Spartan Warrior's Supremacy. Myke, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you have been practically like a Spartan. You were born with a weapon in your hand. You have been out there defending your nation and fighting criminals and doing all the nice things that I like to see on TV. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Look, I understand it sounds impressive, but this is the kind of standard career for intelligence officers that go through it. I'm not a direct combat warfighter, an infantryman, that kind of thing. I've always been in intelligence and investigation and tracking people down. And I actually it's pretty unlikely for me. I come from a Jewish family. My my grandparents were communists, Soviet communists. So my whole family didn't trust the government. And when it sort of 9/11 happened, I think that a lot of us in the United States, at least, we wanted to get involved in the fight very, very quickly. And there was this crazy period in American history. I don't know if you had something similar in either Colombia or Canada, but we started letting contractors, mercenaries, do things that only government officials should do. And so I was hired by these private military contractors, these mercenary firms, to do intelligence targeting. I was a targeting officer for most of my career, and that's sort of what led me into that career.
Well, I mean, this is nothing to be proud of, but the contractors that killed the president of Haiti were Colombians. I mean, it's nothing to be,
It's funny, it's definitely something, I won't lie, Elaine, it's something I feel very conflicted about, right? So I started out as, and let's call them what they are, mercenaries, right? This is what we were. I will say this, all of my colleagues and myself, we took these jobs not to make money. We took them because we wanted to help. It takes you 2 years to get hired in the intelligence services between the security clearance and everything else, or you can go the contractor route and you get hired much more quickly. But I definitely had a lot of internal conflict because the truth was, when I was in Iraq, the companies I worked for, they made money based on the war continuing, not ending, right? And so I really had a lot of internal conflict about that. And eventually I wound up taking a big pay cut and became a direct government employee to sort of take that stain off. I'm sorry, I've got some dogs barking in the background. I hope it's not a problem. So I do think, look, I am very proud of my service, but I definitely have some mixed feelings about having been a contractor.
Right. Well, you said not for the money, and I believe that, but I believe that many people get into kind of armed services or armed welfare for the glory as well. I mean, I remember as a kid, I went to ROTC Army School, and I have visions of me being this warrior at one time. I didn't go into it, but like I wanted to have that glory and recognition. Some of my peers that I am brave, that I'm fearless, that I don't cry, all this and that. So I think that's a great pull for many people to take up on arms.
Yeah, it is. There's certainly an emotional factor to it. And look, this is why we sometimes have problems, is it attracts bullies. It attracts people who maybe have had family problems, and they may be people who are frightened and want to prove these things to themselves. It's definitely, again, like these are definitely things in all armed services that you need to look out for sure.
And well, since I mentioned glory, I mean, I didn't expect to go this way, but do you think this is mostly like a men's thing, that we had to take arms and beat up someone or defend somebody else, and not because now there are females in the army as well, and they say they're as competent as men, but I don't know if that would be the first instance to fight somebody else, but I'm just speculating there.
Yeah, I mean, it's changing, and thank God, right? We absolutely need women. And I love the fact that the armed services are diversifying finally and giving women their rightful place in armed service. There's a wonderful essay by a woman named Cameron Hurley called "We Have Always Fought," which talks about women in armed services going back all the way to ancient times, and that we really don't. Women were always fighting, but that we don't know about it because it was men who was writing history, and don't really document those cases. So I really am glad to see that in there. But look, there's a wonderful comedian. I can't remember his name, but he has this great routine. And he says, when I was a little boy and standing on a diving board, and I said, "Mommy, look at me. If she had just looked up from her drink and looked at me when I was 6, I wouldn't be up here making jokes today." And I think the same is true of a lot of people in armed service. Like, I think a lot of young boys, who have emotional issues, right? Because they've had trouble in their families. That some of them trying to make themselves feel safe, trying to make themselves feel seen, will enter armed services. That doesn't mean that you can't be effective in the armed services if you come to it with this emotional baggage. But I do think that intellectuals need to reckon with that honestly, right? That does drive people into that work.
I'm just gonna pull out two examples that I brought from, I don't know, from reading somewhere else. I heard or I read that Hitler became this whatever warrior. If I'm just lacking words in my mind, because he couldn't be an accomplished artist.
Right? Yeah.
And that Fidel Castro became also a revolutionary because he couldn't become a good baseball player.
Yeah, I mean, this does not surprise me at all. Although I wouldn't call Hitler a warrior, I'd call him a monster. But yes,
right.
I do think that. And look, there's no look. I certainly am not a fan of either Castro or Hitler. But I think for other men who are not monstrous that enter the armed services, I think being honest with those emotional drivers, there's no shame in that, right? You can still be really effective as a police officer, and a good police officer, and a good war fighter. Someone who's ethical, someone who only uses force when absolutely necessary. But I think you lose nothing by being honest with yourself about those emotional drivers that drive us into it. And in fact, identifying with them and understanding what they are and how they move you can help you to be more effective and ethical in your service.
Okay, well, I'm going to switch gears. So you did all these years as an intelligence officer, and you were in the FBI, CIA, and DIA. I wonder how that translated into you being a part of this TV series, Haunted, I believe it's called.
Yeah, it's 1-to-1. So I can't swear to this, but what they did for Hunted was they took both law enforcement, fugitive recovery agents. These are people who go after fugitives from the law. And then they took counterterrorism targeters. These are targeting officers who do the same thing, except they're going after terrorists instead of legal fugitives in the United States. And both of those class of workers have the same set of skills: how to find people, right? That's what it is. And when CBS was casting for Hunted, the production company, they went to MoPic, that's the motion picture office that talks to Hollywood, for CIA. And they asked, who do you have here who are really powerful and effective counterterrorism targeters who we could recruit? And I am assuming someone in that office was a fan of my books, because I was certainly good at being a targeter, but I wasn't spectacular. And they said, you need to go talk to Myke Cole. And I think then they tracked me down from there.
Okay, well, I don't remember which famous writer said this, but the quote goes like this: "The pen is more powerful than the sword." And I guess in a given moment you realize that you started using the pen. I mean, a computer screen. So
it's wonderful.
How did that happen? I mean, you are fighting, you thinking about criminals, and then you sit down at night and start typing your experiences?
No, I was always a writer. I was a writer since I was a little boy. I don't know if you remember the animated Lord of the Rings, the Rankin and Bass one from when we were young. My mom bought me the vinyl record, and it had the liner notes, the script of what the characters were saying. And I must have been 6 or 5. And I went upstairs and I got a paper and pen and I copied all the writing down and came down to my mother and said, I wrote a book. It's what I always wanted to do since I was little. But look, being a writer, it's like trying to be a rock star or an actor. It's almost impossible, right? To get a publisher to pick you up. So I was already writing books and I had manuscripts on the shelf before I went to Iraq. In fact, I was working on manuscripts at night when I got off duty in Iraq.
Wow.
So those two were always happening at the same time.
Well, let me tell you, you broke my heart because I participated in something called the Spartan Race. I paid $120, and I believe that I believe on that association of myself climbing walls with this elite group of fighters, and now you're telling me that they were not that elite after all.
Well, let me be clear. I think it's great that you did the Spartan Race. And I think it's awesome that you climbed that wall. And that's incredibly kick-ass. And you don't need to be ashamed of it in the least. All I have done is given you some historical context that in no way cheapens your awesome achievement. So congratulations. That's fantastic. But yes, the Spartans were not special. And the reason that I wound up writing this book is not because of harmless stuff like a Spartan Race. Who cares, right? The reason I wrote it is that a lot of very, very extreme right-wing political organizations, and I'm not talking about normal right-wing organizations, conservative political parties, or the Republican Party. I'm talking about the Oath Keepers in the United States, or Génération Identitaire in France, or the Sons of Odin, or Allianzo Nazionale in Italy. These are truly extreme, violent, fascist groups around the world are using the imagery of the Spartans as symbols, as galvanizing symbols. And since the rise of Trump in the United States, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that Trump is part of a global phenomenon. There's been an increase of extreme right-wing politics around the world, particularly in Poland. We have Hungary, the victory of Viktor Orban over there. I just thought it was really important to try to take some of that symbol back for truth, because the idea, this false idea of who the Spartans were, that they were the world's greatest warriors, that they never surrendered, that they were never frightened, that they never lost. This is really an important symbol that the far right wing is using. And not only, look, reasonable people can disagree about politics. I certainly support reasonable center-right movements, but I'm not happy about extreme right-wing violent movements. And if there was something I could do to help strike a blow against that, while also telling the truth about who the Spartans were, I wanted to do that very badly.
But I get the sense that none of these groups that you mentioned are actual history readers. They get their ideas of Spartan superiority maybe from Hollywood. So in a way, I think Hollywood gets all the claim or glory from this myth that we have created, and their business is to create myth. I mean, that's what they do for business. For them, is the same Star Wars as the Spartans, and so I guess the fault goes to us for believing things that we see in TV or in the movies. I don't think the Oathkeeper actually buy history books and get their ideas from those history books.
I agree, although there are right-wing historians that provide a narrative, and what perhaps the most famous one is Victor Davis Hanson, but there are other ones as well. Paul Rahe is another example that provide right-wing historical interpretations of the Spartan myth. I don't agree with them at all. And I think I make a pretty good case based in the sources to oppose them. But yes, and really there are two pop culture pieces in particular that most of these far right wing groups draw on. The first is Frank Miller's 1998 comic book 300, which was this massive success. And in 2006, Zack Snyder's film of the same name. That made it into a movie. Those two pieces of pop culture really drive most of this just absolutely false picture of who the Spartans were. And it's so funny because a lot of these, I call them Sparta Chads, these like Spartan fanboys who are so excited about this myth, they come after me on social media a lot. And they always say, Myke's book is totally inaccurate, but they never say why it's inaccurate or how it's inaccurate. They just say it's inaccurate. They don't defeat it point by point. And the reason they don't is that they can't, because I'm using accurate history here.
Okay, well, can you tell us a little bit of that accurate history? Was the scorecard to, for lack of a better
Yeah,
word, and can you also describe, because not all my listeners are connoisseur of history, what is Sparta? What time history we are talking about? Who
sure,
were the main enemies or the people that they fought
sure.
against?
Sure. So Sparta is the idea of Sparta to the modern person is that they were the world's super warriors. And when we talk about that, we are talking about ancient Sparta. This is really Sparta of the 5th and 4th centuries BC. Sparta is a city that still exists today on the southern Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece. It's, in my opinion, one of the less exciting cities in Greece. It certainly doesn't hold a candle to Athens. And it was a political power, a fairly major political power in the Mediterranean basin. It established hegemony over Greece for about 5 seconds at the end of the Peloponnesian War. It's certainly contested with the major imperial power in the region at the time, which was Achaemenid Persia, which dominated the Middle East and what we consider to be Turkey and much of the Balkans today. But this idea of the Spartans, that this mythic idea that was perpetuated in films like 300 is exactly what I said, that they were super warriors, that they hated money, that they hated luxury, that they only ever trained for war, that they never lost, that they never surrendered, that they only ate simple food, that they would look at their children, their babies, when they were born, and if they were in any way sick or weak, they would throw them into a chasm so that only strong men would grow up to be fighters for the state. And all of this is false, all of it. And most of it comes from a writer writing 500 years after this period, who is Plutarch, who's a famous writer, and Plutarch's Lives. And these are moralistic essays, by the way, they're not history. They're taught in a lot of English classes and classic classes. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with them. And famous phrases that I think a lot of your listeners will be familiar with. The Spartan mother saying to her son, "Come back with your shield or on it." You know, either come back carrying your shield or being dead carried upon it. Those come from Plutarch, and of course it's nonsense. You know, Spartans were not carried on shields. You know, that's not how they usually buried in the nearest friendly territory where they fell. So it just doesn't make any sense. But I want to be clear. One of my goal in writing this book was not to slam the Spartans, not to shame them, but just to show them as who they were: normal human beings, average people like you, like me. The Spartans were no worse than other Greek city-states from a military perspective. Athens, Thebes, Phocis, Thespiae. They were no worse than those. They were not more cowardly. They were not weaker. They were not less tactically organized, but they were also no better. And one of the things I do in the book is, look, if we think that the Spartans are these super warriors, that should be reflected in their battles, right? If we have sources that tell us about, you know, most of the battles they fought. So did they win? Did they lose? Did they run? Did they surrender? So all I did was go through those battles, not all of them, but most of them. And I also tried to make sure that I covered all different types: sieges, naval battles, battles on broken terrain, battles where they were outnumbered, battles at night, you know, skirmishes, and then keep score. When did they win? When did they lose? And when you look at that scorecard, which is in the center of the book, you discover they were average. They won some, they lost some. And that's okay. And this is what's so interesting to me, is that people get so angry at this idea that human beings are human beings. And honestly, most of the people that criticize it, they're people who haven't been in the military. They don't know what real fighting is like. Look, I've been as an intelligence officer, as a tactical intelligence officer, I've been attached to SEAL teams. I've been attached to CAG operators. I've run with MARSOC guys. Like, I've been with direct action teams that are the ninjas of the United States military. I've also done this with members of the British military. And yes, they do have elite status, and they do have incredible heart. They have incredible training. They have incredible equipment, but they are still human beings, and they make mistakes, and they get scared, and they sometimes are greedy or proud or frightened or any of these other things. And I really think it's important to see people as people for a bunch of reasons. One is because it prevents us from this, like, well, for one thing, the truth matters. But more importantly, when we look, people like this myth of Sparta because it lifts them up. Look, it got you to climb a 100-foot wall, right? It got you to run that Spartan race. The idea of this myth of these powerful people inspired you and made you do something extraordinary. And that's wonderful. But I would argue that when you see people who are just like you, that are flawed like you, that fail like you, it's even more inspiring. Because when they do have successes, then you think, wow, maybe I could do that too. Because I don't know about you, when I look at a bronze statue, when I look at Superman, man, I could never do anything he does. He's a superhero, right? I don't want superheroes. I want human beings who are like me. That's what inspires me, and that's what I hope will inspire my readers.
Well, I can tell you for sure one thing in which the Spartans had superiority, and that is they had an amazing public relation department, because here we are thousands of years later still talking about them. But
right.
I wonder if you could describe, I mean, these wars, this battle happened 400, no, what is it, 500 years before BC. I wonder if you could describe what was a battlefield at that time. I mean, they had shields and swords and spears. What else?
So the sort of classical heavy infantry warrior in ancient Greece was known as the hoplite, and I'm anglicizing the word. The word in Greek is pronounced hoplite, but it is, and the opla is the full armor and weapons. So basically, hoplite means the guy with all the gear, the guy with all the equipment, and what it normally was, the minimum requirement was about a 22-pound round shield that was about 2.5, 3 feet in diameter, and a 7 to 9 foot thrusting spear that you could thrust overhand or under the shield. And they would form together what's called a phalanx, which is, and it's a very simple thing. You just overlap your shields and you stand shoulder to shoulder and you go back in ranks, usually about 6 to 8. And you move forward and the two phalanxes clash and push against each other. And this is called ophismos in Greek, stabbing each other. And it's a very simple form of warfare. And the reason it was so simple is that there were no professional militaries. And this includes the Spartans too, by the way. The Spartans had a greater sense of discipline and organization, but they were certainly not professionals the way modern militaries are professionals. And if you're a farmer and you're picking up your spear to go fight once, like whenever there's an emergency, you have no time, you don't really train. So your way of fighting has to be very simple so that, anyone can do it. So what do? The trumpet sounds, you have to come defend your city, you grab your shield, you grab your spear, and you line up, and that's it. Now, the more wealthy hoplites could have had additional armor, a bronze helmet, a bronze, what we call a cuirass, which is a breast and back plate, or possibly one made of leather called a spolas, or a linothorakis, which is layers of linen. And there would be a kilt that protected the groin. Also bronze greaves, which it's kind of like a shin guard knee cover, both. It so protects the shins and goes up over the knee. And this ophismos, these phalanxes pushing against each other, would happen until one side broke and they would run and the other side would chase them. You had other troop types. You had skirmishers with missiles. You had cavalry on the wings. But this idea of hoplites was really the core of how the ancient Greeks fought when they fought each other. But they also fought other peoples, right? So they're the most famous fight, the Battle of Thermopylae, about which the film and comic book 300 were made. These are the Achaemenid Persians, and their way of equipping themselves was very different. They were archery dependent. They were much more dependent on missiles. And also Persia was this massive and diverse empire drawing from, what we would consider modern day Arabia and Ethiopia and the Sudan and the Black Sea and what we would consider modern day Pakistan. So each of these troops having their own kinds of weapons, their own kinds of armor. So a much more diverse army against which the Greeks fought. But when you picture the Spartan hoplite, you are picturing this bronze armored warrior with this round shield and this spear, also having a sword, but the spear is the main weapon in that phalanx, which I just described.
So now that you tell the whole world that the Spartans were just regular people, you think there will be a shift on how the rest of us see the Spartan, or are we going to continue having this romantic idea that the Spartans were the be-all and of history, and that, yes, that was a nice book that you just wrote, but we rather keep our dreams alive?
I think probably the latter. I certainly, look, I'm glad I put the argument into the public eye. I think I've planted a seed, but this is how history works, right? All you can do is put an idea out there and hope people talk about it. But the reality is that some historians who are relentlessly committed to this myth of Spartan supremacy, Paul Cartledge at the University of Cambridge is one of these guys, just like absolutely dedicated to this idea of the Spartans being tough. They attack these ideas in the press because this is what they built their careers on, right? They're, if they admit that I'm right, then they have to be wrong, and that can never be. So I certainly don't flatter myself by thinking I'm going to change everybody's mind overnight. But what I have done is I've planted the seed. I've put the idea out there in the marketplaces of ideas, and now it will be talked about at least. It will be there for conversation. But look, you went and climbed that wall, right? That Spartan race, you paid money to do that, right? There's a lot of money.
120 US.
That's right. There's a lot of money to be made on this Spartan myth. So I don't think people are going to give that up very, very easily. And that's okay. What I wanted to do was put the truth out there and at least give people something to cite and reference when we deal with these extremist right-wing groups. And I think I've done that.
Well, Mike, another thing, I see that you also have a fascination with uniforms. You have been in all these armed forces, and now you seem to be serving the fire department.
Yeah.
Yes. First of all, thank you for saving whichever community you are saving. But can you tell us what is it that you're doing nowadays as a fire?
Sure. So, it's actually really funny. I was in New York State, and I've come back down. I'm now in Louisiana, which is in the southern United States. And they have rejected all the states in the United States. They don't have the same, they don't recognize each other's training. So all of my certifications to be a firefighter in New York are no good here. So I am back in school. I'm back in Fire Academy, which I already graduated, training again, the same things I already did. But it's very good. It's good for a couple of reasons. First is it reminds me it's not about me and what I want. It's about what the service needs. And the second is we have a saying in the fire service: you can never train too much for a job that can kill you. So I am very grateful for the opportunity to go over my basics again. Once I go over my basics again, hopefully I can get back onto, I'd really like to get onto what we call our tech rescue squad here. This is where we do high angle rescues, fast water rescues, collapsed trench rescues. I love putting out fire, but the thing I like more than that is going in and rescuing victims. And those what we call technical rescue in the United States is really what I want to get more into once I get this training requirement out of the way.
Well, Mike, I cannot thank you enough for, first of all, for the book, and secondly for the eagerness to continue going out there and helping people. Just to close it off, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you're doing?
Sure. The book is called The Bronze Lie, Shattering the Myth of Spartan Warrior Supremacy. And readers who want to follow me can either follow me on Twitter at Myke Cole, that's MYKECOLE. I'm on Instagram at Myke_Cole, spelled the same way. Or you can friend me on Facebook at facebook.com/Myke Cole. And I have a website, MykeCole.com.
Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun.